Forced labor in the United States? The Trump administration says yes. Yet, at the same time, it has rolled out tariffs to punish other economies for allegedly failing to stop forced labor. On July the 24th, the U.S.'s Trade Representative Office, or USTR, announced new tariffs ranging from 10% to 12.5% on 60 economies for allegedly putting U.S. businesses at a disadvantage. China is among the economies that face the higher rate of 12.5%, along with many other developing countries and allies who were not allies of the United States. Many of them were not given any special treatment. Yet, the same Trump administration, pointing the finger at others, has admitted that forced labor exists and persists in the United States. Should they be looking closer to home? Or maybe it's not really about labor protection. So what exactly is behind these new tariffs? Welcome to this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm pleased to be joined from New York by Anthony Chen, Global Chief Economist at Chen Economics and former Chief Economist at JPMorgan Chase. From Manila, the Philippines, by Sebastian Contin, Geopolitics Analyst and AsiaGlobal Fellow at the University of Hong Kong. And here in the studio by Zhao Hai, Director of International Political Studies at the National Institute for Global Strategy. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So the basis for the U.S. to announce the latest tariffs is that these economies have failed to impose or effectively enforce a prohibition of forced labor, therefore putting U.S. businesses at a disadvantage. But let me start by trying to get this out of my way, because I see a contradiction as the United States admit, or the Trump administration, I should say, admit itself that it is not a model student in the classroom. Here's the details, what I mean. According to the website of U.S. Department of Homeland Security, while many view forced labor as only an international issue, quote unquote, it occurs closer to home than we may realize. Forced labor exists and persists in the U.S. even today. And data from the National Human Trafficking Hotline of the United States shows that forced labor exists in a variety of industries, including domestic work, restaurant and food services, construction and agriculture, and so on and so forth. So, Anthony, let me go to you first. Shouldn't the U.S., if it is really interested about protecting labor rights, start with its home turf?
Well, I think you make a very good point. But the reality is, if you look at the history of these tariffs, they've always used some sort of an excuse to justify the tariff. At first, it was national security. Other times, it was a border crisis. Other times, it was drugs coming into the country. Other times, it was a balance of payments problem. And of course, the United States doesn't have a balance of payments problem. And these are all different reasons to justify tariffs. Another investigation that's going on right now is to look at to see whether or not there is excess capacity. So Democrats in the United States are arguing that many of these reasons are basically made up in order to justify the tariffs.
Sebastian, what is your take on this? Because logic should be, if the U.S. is really concerned about protecting labor rights, it should do something about its own industries, about its own forced labor problems, shouldn't it?
Well, I agree. This is sort of the next episode, right, in the tariff spectacle, and it's pure protectionism. It doesn't matter how you dress it up, right? Now it's surprisingly is presented as a human rights campaign, and this argument that forced labor goods are artificially cheap or are undercutting American producers. Well, this would be a very good point if would be applied would be praiseworthy if applied universally, right, to regions, to countries where human rights or violations occur. But as you say, there is kind of selective morality, right? Like pointing to others when you have at home certain issues that shouldn't be overlooked. And I mean, the very basic ones, you have still Guantanamo open, right? You have systemic racism in your society that you have been unable to eradicate. You have prison labor, and you are right now saying that others are trading with the United States unfairly because they are not applying certain rules that you don't apply to yourself, particularly because the United States have not signed protocols on forced labor. So it's contradictory, it's hypocritical, it's double standards, and it's selective morality altogether. In the end, what you want to do is to overcome a ruling by your Supreme Court that is saying that you cannot do whatever you want to do. So the reality behind is that the President of the United States is finding another way for applying a policy that so far has proved to be very wrong, but still they insist, and right now is on forced labor issues. Let's see what this leads us.
Mr. Zhao, people, especially viewers on social media such as YouTube, have left a lot of comments about prison forced labor in the United States, about minimum wages in the United States, which is extraordinarily low and remains stagnant since the beginning of this century. So do you think the U.S. can sell this story that these new tariffs are about human rights? Do you think they can sell that to people anymore?
Well, absolutely not. If we look at what happened right now, the key is timing. Why now the United States using so-called forced labor as an excuse for tariff is because their previous tariff is expiring and also being killed by their own Supreme Court. And right now they're seeking for another alternative. And if forced labor is really a problem, they should have addressed this a long time ago. And of course, as we all know, the incarceration, the minimum wage problem, and the racism that Sebastian mentioned, there are so many problems within the United States. And if the U.S. compared to other countries and states, in particular the European Union or Canada or other countries, the U.S. has no moral high ground in comparison. So to use forced labor as an excuse to impose tariff means that what USTR eventually revealed, that is about U.S. business in disadvantage. So in one word, this is a pure protectionism on U.S. part. Has nothing to do with human rights, with forced labor, with trying to solve this problem and address the root cause of forced labor globally.
So if human rights protection is not at the root of this, what is the real intention of these policies? Mr. Zhao, you mentioned the timing. Let's take a look at the most recent timeline of tariffs from the most powerful country in the world. On April the 2nd last year, President Trump unveiled his so-called Liberation Day tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. Now, these tariffs were stricken down in February this year by the U.S. Supreme Court, which ruled by majority that IEEPA does not authorize such broad tariffs. And on the same day, the White House invoked Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974 to impose a 10% global tariffs for a maximum of 150 days, which means they would expire on July the 24th, which and unsurprisingly, on July the 24th, hours before those tariffs were set to expire, new tariffs were announced, as we mentioned, this time based on Section 301 of the same Trade Act. 60 economies around the world now face 10 to 12.5% tariffs in the U.S. opinion, who have failed to curb forced labor. Anthony, help us understand, because there are a lot of big or very subtle coincidences, right, on the same day, immediately afterwards, or right before, hours before. What is going on here?
Well, it's clear that they want to impose these tariffs, and they'll be looking for reasons to impose these tariffs. Keep in mind that if you really dig down into Section 301, it typically can be invoked if there's a problem with trade between the United States and another country, or maybe even a few countries. But what are the coincidences, to use your terminology, that the same problem is going to exist in 60 countries together, when in fact the Section 301 typically is to redress issues, discriminatory tariffs or unfair competition or market access between a few countries. So they basically had to get an excuse to impose these tariffs. And that's one of the reasons why I believe that these tariffs will also end up being decided by the Supreme Court and may very well be stricken down also.
As reports have pointed out, litigation seems to have already started by companies who are contesting these latest tariffs. But again, to understand the mentality behind the policymakers, Sebastian, Contin, what is your understanding, for instance, of the selection of these particular economies? They range from developed European economies, Japan, South Korea, the China, of course, the mainland, and then the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, Taiwan Province, and then also a whole host of countries in Latin America, and of course Canada and Mexico. What's the consideration potentially behind these selections?
Well, Miss Liu, I would say that those are the details that they are. This is the kind of the narrative they are trying to impose, or to they pretend that all the experts or policymakers globally are going to debate now around what are the countries. The reality is, in my perspective, is if we look at the broader setting, we have probably the reason why policymakers in the United States now are applying these measures. And the reality is that Donald Trump is going through the most difficult stretch of his time in office. In almost 6 years, he's been president, right? Between his first and second terms. So he appears to believe tariffs can manage a variety of crises of his own making every single time there is a problem, no? So we have right now he's dealing with the calamity, the fallout of the Iran campaign, achieving nothing, only making everything worse. Some days ago, pushing the Brent over almost up to 100 USD a barrel, raising the risk of an energy shock, more inflation, higher interest rates, and then there is public discontent, and soon, very soon, there will be elections in the US. There is public discontent with his policies, reaching a new high. Meanwhile, legal certainty, something that is key for provoking that there are more countries, more companies wanting to invest in the US, trading with the United States. The reality is that legal certainty is eroded every single day from the one that should protect it in the interest of the full American people, all the citizens. Is the White House who is eroding the legal certainty in the US right now. So this is what is happening now. This new tariff campaign is part of this general setting, right? And we have already said that on February the Supreme Court ruled the tariffs illegal. So now they are trying to find another way for hiding that this was a true major blow, right? For a full year, the tariffs were serving for as an economic tool, but right now are also a political tool, and that's why the excuse right now is forced labor or human rights.
Mr. Zhao, I would like to get your input on this, but let's look at China's reaction, right? It seems to be really dry. China says, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson, that China's position on U.S.-China economic and trade issues is consistent and clear. We oppose all forms of unilateral tariff wars and trade wars serve no one's interests. That's it. How do you look at that?
Well, that's very short, clear, and resolute. I think it's quite clear that at this point, there's nothing more to say to the U.S. side, because it seems like the Trump administration is determined to push forward their tariff scheme. And from the very beginning, there are two features of their tariff. One is that they seem to have a 10% minimum tariff line. That means I think they did some calculation, because on the one hand, 10% can add to the burden of the importers and therefore shift the supply chain. At the same time, 10% can also increase government revenue for the U.S. government to collect more revenue from tariff importers, and at the same time forcing the exporter to change the behavior. And also, of course, on top of that, Trump wants to have this leverage against other trading partners, because if you look at the 60 countries in the list, those countries have the highest trade surplus with the United States, and therefore including all those countries, can make sure that the U.S. will use tariff to change their position vis-a-vis those countries, and therefore using the leverage to force those countries to increase investment in the United States and change their trade practices according to Trump's ideas. So following that, I think right now for China, of course, from this May, the two top leaders has reached agreement that China and the United States will build the constructive strategic stability relationship. And I think trade is part of that, and the United States has promised China that whatever the tariff will shift later on, the overall tariff will remain on the certain stage, which is according to last October's agreement in Busan. So I think moving forward, China maintained the position of looking at what is going on and what has changed, and also maintain the position of reacting to whatever the United States is moving forward with their tariffs. And in addition to that, of course, China and the United States has ready to establish the Trade Board of Trade. And under that Board of Trade, there's other issues up to $30 billion of trade on both sides that is required to lower the tariff against each other. So I think overall, this will continue to sort of injecting uncertainty to the global trading system. And the US has been violating WTO rules here and there, and rendering WTO almost unworkable. So moving forward, I think, again, there will be legal challenges, and other countries will probably stand up and retaliate this time around. And I don't think this tariff can stand the challenge from domestic and international actors.
Anthony, what is your understanding of the 10 to 12.5% calculation? Is it to keep the previous tariffs pretty much steady on the same level in place, just using another name? Or are there other calculations? They're talking about forced labor. How do they come to the term of what is, okay, we don't buy that game, right? But how is the 10 to 12.5% calculated?
Well, the rationale they use is that somehow the 10% is those that have actually already approved legislation to outlaw the forced labor, but somehow they allow some products to ship in so that a percentage of those products have embedded in them forced labor. In fact, the U.S. Trade Representative's Office itself did a study and found that when you look at all the manufacturing goods produced around the world, we're talking less than 1% of them have any component of forced labor, and yet you're imposing these tariffs of 10 to 12.5%. And the 12.5% would be for those countries that they feel have not really passed any legislation to outlaw the forced labor. But once again, when you look at actual revenues, we're talking about numbers that are mind-boggling. We're talking about 10 to 12.5%, and the damage is less than 1%. And in terms of revenues, it's about 30 to 1. These are not my numbers. These are numbers that were produced by the Cato Institute, which is a conservative think tank. So that would suggest that they would be a little bit more friendly towards the administration, and yet the numbers do not support what the administration is doing. So clearly it is to raise revenues, and some estimates suggest that these revenues can amount to as much as $2 trillion over the next 10 years. I don't think these tariffs are going to last 10 years. I don't even think they're going to survive the legislative challenges, but these are the estimates. So clearly it is a revenue-generating strategy that the administration has taken so far.
What will be the effects of these tariffs on U.S. affordability? That seems to have been an issue. So does the Trump administration actually say, well, since affordability has been an issue, might as well keep it that way? Because if you retract from your previous policy, you're kind of admitting that you are wrong. Anthony, I stay with you for that question.
No, it's very clear. I mean, there have been times when the administration says that affordability is a hoax, that it actually doesn't exist, even though it's been well documented that we do have an affordability crisis in housing. We have the top 10% of the population consuming almost 50% of all the consumption spending that's taking place in the United States. We certainly do have the numbers that suggest that. Even when you look at delinquency rates, you see that the bottom 20 to 40% of the population is struggling. When you look at what percentage of their income goes towards staples like food and energy, much, much higher, and those things are going up quite a bit. So there's no question that there is a affordability crisis. I think it's well documented. But here again, because the agenda at the Washington level is to raise revenues with these tariffs, and guess who actually pays for these tariffs? It is the people that can least afford to pay, the lower income individuals. A bigger percentage of their income goes towards paying these tariffs. Of course, originally, the administration was arguing that these tariffs were paid by the exporters, not by the consumers. But in fact, studies even by the Federal Reserve, I used to be an economist at the Federal Reserve, both in Washington and New York, they've come up with studies that the overwhelming majority of these tariffs are in fact paid by consumers. So clearly consumers are going to be facing a burden, higher prices. That means it's inflationary, but also on the affordability, it's sort of a double whammy negative impact on these consumers.
What about on European manufacturers or consumers or just public opinion in general, Sebastian? Although these new tariffs seems to replace old expiring ones, so de facto there probably won't going to be price changes, but do these tariffs matter in any other perspective?
Well, there will not be probably much changes because we have, again, if we check to the pattern, if we don't look, let's say, if we are not looking like to the news cycle, right? If we are looking to the geopolitical setting, to what's really going on, the undercurrents, we have that the European leadership already capitulated to Trump a year ago in his Gulf resort, and that sets the template, right, for everything that has followed. Actually, exactly 1 year ago today, Ursula von der Leyen signed the so-called Turnberry framework with Trump. So congratulations to both of them on the anniversary if they are watching. But this agreement was the most epic reverse colonization in history. Why? Because the United States retained that 15% tariff on a wide range of European goods. Now it appears it's going to be a little bit less, right? The 10%. And in exchange, the European Union agreed to apply zero tariffs to any American goods. So what is this? What is the reciprocity? What is the advantage for the European consumers, for the European citizens here, right?
So you use the word reverse colonialism. Do I get it right?
Yes, the most epic reverse colonization in history. And they actually did it purposefully. And they explained after to the European public that this was the best deal possible. So we have gone through a lot, right? Since 1 year has passed. That deal actually demonstrated the geopolitical undercurrent. The pattern is that Washington is able to pressure allies now in order to get better arrangements than negotiating with allies. We are not talking now about the US-China rivalry, right? That they fight, yeah, or they are into another level. They are trying to get define who is going to be the next hegemon. Right now, with the European Union still relies so really much on the United States, particularly on security.
It's an emotional choice, probably.
Well, I would say, Ms. Liu, that is, unfortunately for the European citizens, the big responsibility relies on the European leadership. And the European leaders today are very, very, very weak and cowards. And they are unable to face Donald Trump, as China has done, or as Canada's current prime minister has done. Yeah. You are applying me tariffs, I apply you tariffs too. So there is no reciprocity. They are just surrendering. It's a total capitulation. It's shameful for a European to spot this. So this confirms also that with Donald Trump, America was moving from alliance leader to alliance predator. They don't care.
Alliance
as
predator.
Long as it's good for them.
Yeah, Mr. Zhao, it seems quite odd because the European Union or you know, westernized countries in Asia or other parts of the world have been pretty much following the US's leadership, if there is any, in terms of human rights protection or human rights accusation against these countries. But when push comes to shove, when it's necessary, it seems that the US has no problem pointing finger at these countries for their human rights accusation.
Yeah,
Problems.
It's a joke. And if you think back, when they talk about rules-based international order, and now Trump never even mentioned that word. And also remember just a couple of years ago when Biden administration is trying to install so-called Indo-Pacific economic framework, in which labor standard is one of the pillars of that framework. And now Trump is not talking about that either. So now they all of a sudden USTR raised the question of forced labor and used tariff as a way to correct that practice. It's just nonsensical, and it's just self-serving and continue to push Trump's political agenda. At the end of the day, I think, and in particular right now, there's recent polls showing that American people, the majority, 2/3 majority of American people oppose more tariffs. Not like a year ago when Trump just got elected, more than half supported new tariffs. So now they realize the real problem of imposing this kind of tariffs. Again, so at this point, Trump has to make a choice whether to retract his tariff tool or to continue on this path and trying to still collect the political capital from his hardcore supporters. And now it's quite clear that he wanted to maintain control of the most conservative part of the Republican Party, and so that he can continue to be ruling the party, instead of trying to probably resolve the affordability problem and trying to win the midterm.
It seems he doesn't even care about the general voters either, Mr. Zhao. That's baffling for me, because the voters are voting down his performance, right, to record lows.
Yeah, I think he's surrounded by people who only sort of praise his ideas instead of criticizing or warning him about the coming crashing down on the midterm elections. And he's detached from reality. So I think it's very dangerous. And also, on top of that, we all know what's going on across the Strait of Hormuz. And therefore, this affordability problem or inflation problem is not going to solve before the midterm. And that's why I think he sort of lowered the expectation and trying to play up the tariff card and trying to show that his supporters, he's loyal to his original ideas.
Well, has he stopped, Anthony, very quickly, has he stopped watching Fox News? Because according to the latest Fox News poll, President Trump's job approval remains near record low. 3/4 of voters rate the economy negatively. That's about the same for the past half year. Yes or no? What is your guess?
No, he does watch Fox News, no question about it. But I guess that part, he probably steps away to get another Diet Coke and doesn't watch that part.
All right. Well, it's funny, but it's not funny. Yeah, I must say. And again, on the website of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, under this administration, they acknowledge that while many view forced labor as only an international issue, I repeat here, it occurs closer to home than Americans may realize. Forced labor exists and persists in the U.S. even today. Let's keep that in our mind. Many thanks to my guests, Anthony Chen, Sebastian Contin, and Zhao Hai, for this very inspiring discussion. And that's it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As usual, you can follow me on Facebook, X, and YouTube using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point.